This is our first day at Tortoise. We went live this morning at about 6 o'clock. So on behalf of me and my co-founder, Katie Vanek-Smith, a big welcome to this evening's Think-In. The reason why I'm actually really excited about tonight is that this is a Think-In entirely in the spirit of what we're trying to do. We're trying to take subjects and stories that, if you like, bob around there in the back of our minds, or are issues or subjects that were enormously important and then somehow have got forgotten, or are about forces and factors in our lives that are driving the news but not necessarily making the headlines, and that we don't give ourselves the time to think about. And as I was reading through the notes, and I hope you've all got the notes that Imi helped prepare. Where is Imi? There she is. Imi helped prepare on the debate around national service. It struck me that this was a perfect day to think about this subject. And the reason for it is this, as I said, is our first day. So at 6 o'clock in the morning, a fair few of us woke up just to check that the story that Giles Wittep had worked on for some time now had actually landed. It was a piece of deep reporting on MH17, the downing of the Malaysian airliner, and the 298 people who were killed, and the lies that had been told by Russia, and the failure of By about 5 to 7, the relief that story had gone live and has actually been properly reported and properly presented had dissipated at the realization that we had a small bug on our website. And then suddenly the ecstasy was replaced by anxiety, and we rushed around for a couple of hours fixing the bug and working it out. Then I had a bit of time to read the papers, and given the indicative votes in Parliament last night, I found myself unhealthily interested in the voting habits of Lib Dems on possible reproductions of the Norway amendment in the Commons. Fast forward to the end of the evening, and you've got Theresa May at the podium making an announcement that she was unilaterally trying to delay the Brexit process to May the 22nd, and rather than doing a deal with the DUP and reliant upon the Brexiteers, now she was going to throw her lot in with Jeremy Corbyn, and that she would forge a deal with Jeremy Corbyn, reliant presumably on Jeremy Corbyn being prepared to ditch the idea of a forthcoming general election so that he could help prop up the Conservative Party and see through Brexit. And by the end of this day, I thought, you know what, it'd be quite nice to slow down and try and think about something that we nearly discuss but never quite get the time to think about properly. And that is the question of, how do we bind our society together? How do we get over the differences of geography and class and race and opportunity, and actually think to ourselves about this perennial question of whether or not it's time to bring back some form of national service or some form of citizen service? And the reason why I was pleased to do this in the format of a Think-In is that a couple of us here worked previously at the Times. And when I worked at the Times, we would hold leader conference. And when you were trying to put together an editorial at the Times, the sort of classic thing would be, okay, well today maybe what we'll do is we'll do a lead on Brexit, but why don't we do a second leader on national service? And then we'd get a group of us together, we'd argue out what we thought, but we wouldn't have anyone in the room who had personal experience, personal expertise, a different point of view. And the aim of a Think-In is that it's not us journalists who are informing the point of view alone, it's all of us as members of this newsroom. So I hope you will feel that for the next hour or so, this is your newsroom. This is the place where you are going to give your point of view, you won't hold back. We have one rule, and even that is not really well enforced, but the one rule is no questions. The reason is we don't want to have sort of the veneration of experts, much as we value them. We want everyone's view to count, and so we want to hear what you think. As I said, we've got just about an hour, and if I talk any longer, we'll have less than that. But Agatha there, who's our tortoise, makes her stately way across the screen. And once that's done, the job of the editor, in this case me tonight, is to try and piece together what our argument would be. And some nights we don't actually come up with something. Some nights we come up with some leads that we should follow up as a story. And some nights we come away thinking, actually, we're more confused than we started, and we're going to have to think through this at some length. But tonight, I think we've got something which feels like a subject of the moment. Because if you read, and I'm not sure everyone did, Chukwuemuna's statement in the foundation of the Independent Group, he wrote, if you like, a personal manifesto. And it was quite striking. It had actually quite a large number of substantial policy points. But one of the ones that really stood out was the call to move to some form of national service. And I don't know whether or not, Danny, have we got the words up on a screen somewhere? Or if not, I can just read them to you. Who's that? Ah, there we go. There is little dispute the range of factors, social, financial, and educational, that divide us as individuals are at risk of irreparably fracturing our society as a whole. Say the words national service and most groan as images of endless sitcoms spring to mind. But as progressives, he means the Tiggers, I presume, as progressives, we should be prepared to get beyond visions of the past and create a version of national service that succeeds for today's world in achieving the only thing that those who actually undertook it are pretty much agreed on, that it brought together people from an array of different backgrounds and different parts of the country in a way like no other. If we go, Danny, just for a second to the other screens, there was one which showed the state of conscription and military service in Europe, which I think is just useful. You go back just one. Oh, no, not to David Cameron. That. So the interesting thing there, just for what it's worth, is obviously you can see the Nordic countries where there is conscription. What's interesting is that within the EU, there is a return to the discussion. The light green is the discussion of national service. This issue is happening not just in this country. Can I start by asking, is there anyone in the room who's actually served in the military or in some form of national service? So why don't we start with you then? Do you think this is a good idea? Do you think you would?
Charge me if I thought, yeah. First of all, excuse my voice. I have been talking all afternoon. It's quite an old voice, so it gets quite tired. I joined the services in '57.
And so what's your name?
Bob Forsyth.
Well, thank you very much.
So that's before most of you were born. My brother did national service. I was regular Navy. I spent most of that time in a submarine. And from that, I draw one great big conclusion. That if you take a group of people and put them into a sardine can and tell them to live together, and half of them are non-volunteers at least, they all learn to coexist. And they learn as a group how to work together, how to sublimate the worst part of their characteristics. But we weren't quiet, unassuming people. We all had spikes in our character. But you learn how to cope with other people. And to me, that was the essence of national service, how to live with other people. I wouldn't recommend straight away return to 2 years military service. I think there are better alternatives than that. And the other thing I'd like to say is I think the conversation, we should turn it on its head and not think, as many people do, what can youth do for the country, or what can the country do for youth. We have removed large slices of support for youth. We see that in knife crime on the streets, and we have to find a way to motivate youth, give them something to believe in, something to do, and something to do for themselves, which teaches them how to exist as a group.
And just one of the things that's obviously implicit in Chukwuemuna's statement is that it would bring people together. Do you think that in your life, the people that you met over those couple of years, as well as learning to get on with them, that you created social bonds that lasted, or not?
Yes, definitely. I mean, if you spend 20 years in a small organisation like the submarine service, you become very bonded, possibly exclusively so. So you look perhaps too much inwards and not enough outwards. So you have to be careful of too much, but we're not talking 20 years here, we're talking months or something.
Yes.
But you do, if you do something together, whether it's climbing a mountain, canoeing down a river, taking part in some activity, if you do it as a group in which you all depend on each other, you walk off together.
Yes. Can I, Modo, I know that you served here. Will you tell us a little bit about what you did in the military and then what your view is of this subject?
Okay, so I was a regular...
Oh, sorry, I do introduce
so
yourself.
my name is Murdo Urquhart. I was a regular infantry officer for 37 years and I retired in 2013. I served a lot in Northern Ireland. I was that generation. I served in Iraq and Sudan. And in Sudan I served in a multinational African Union and United Nations mission. And I'd echo what Bob says there, that it doesn't matter what rank you are and what background you are, you forge a really strong bond. And I did my first tour in Northern Ireland as a young second lieutenant back in 1978, and one of my soldiers was killed then. And the 40th anniversary was last December, and the members of my platoon, we all gathered at his graveside. And we all came from very different social backgrounds, but there was this extraordinary bond that was still there. And it doesn't matter whether it's in soldiering. I agree with Bob, it can be in what we call adventurous training, climbing up a mountain with non-military people. When you do something together in those circumstances, that's a challenge. It does, it forms a lasting bond.
And can I, forgive me, can I call you Murdo?
Please.
So, we don't get it, that's right. That's right. Well, one of the questions that comes with this is that there's for those people who didn't serve, who were born after military service, there's often a romance about the idea of a return to military service that it will break down bonds of class. But the critics often say, actually, you forget there was an officer class and there was a class of people who served and actually reinforced class lines. It didn't bring people together in different backgrounds. Was that not your experience?
Definitely not. I think that was the case, but the social background, those social divisions were going when I joined and had gone by the time I left. And as I say, when I joined in 1976, it was probably still there to a degree, but when you're on operations together in Northern Ireland and you're relying on each other, it doesn't matter what your rank is.
And what would you say to people who make the case that, look, this is a lovely argument, but it's just rather nostalgic? You know, the truth is, if you look at army numbers and if you look at the funding of the armed forces today, there's just no way that we can financially sustain a new form of national military service. It's not what the army needs. You know, the army needs technology and kit and investment in a professional force. It doesn't need, you know, vast numbers of untrained people.
Yeah. If I can make it clear, of course, that I'm not speaking for the...
No. I'm asking you, everyone here is speaking in a very personal capacity. Not metaphorically, I'm imagining. Yeah.
The army, this would be seriously bad news for the army. The army is now too small to run a form of national service. It would end up taking up the whole army just to do it. And the young people who join the army want to go abroad, they want to go on operations. And if they found that they're actually joining a career where they're then training people of a similar age, I think you'd see the army hemorrhage. It's too small, and to use a phrase, it would become a self-licking lollipop, and it wouldn't have any capacity for doing what the government wanted it to do.
Right.
So, whereas the concept of national service is a good thing, I think, got to find another way to do it.
Okay.
I think you would find that actually when you spoke to people who had done national service, that there was a very large number who didn't see it in the mythologically cheery way that television presented it. There were a lot of people in the Navy and in the Army, perhaps also in the Army, who actually didn't have a lot of purpose for what they were doing. They
Right.
bonded.
Well, they were sitting around.
Sitting around.
Yeah.
They would have liked to have done something.
So before we move on, because Yanis, I just wanted to bring you in because you have experience. Tell us a little bit about how the Greek, so you're Greek, aren't you, and how the Greek system works.
Precisely. Actually, it's what both the speakers before me said. It's exactly that. We have a conscription which is mandatory. We have about 90,000 conscripts every single year. And to those you have to add the permanent personnel, the professional army. So we're talking about more like 150,000 every single year. Greece has a massive standing army for its size. So my experience when I showed up there was precisely what was described. A lot of the conscripts were sitting around, smoking, just sitting around. There was nothing to do because there's just thousands of them in a very small country. And what this ends up doing is you have morale completely at rock bottom. You have people, and this is one of the, I didn't serve in the end. What happens is you receive training for 45 days, and then for about 9 months, you simply sit around taking care of the camp. Now, what a huge waste of money and what a huge waste of energy and youth would that be? Whereas, I honestly can't imagine the person, if someone tells you, like, go into the army for 45 days and train, just go, like, run up a mountain, exactly that sort of team activity. I can't imagine what would be the person that would say no. I would take that opportunity at any given moment. I imagine when you invited me here, because my articles have been against the idea of national service, that I'm supposed to be the against voice. My idea of being against national service is substituting our responsibility towards young people for providing them with services and for providing them with purpose, with this idea of just like shoving them somewhere, which is just a glorified nanny, because we don't know what to do with them. We don't know what to do with them. We've cut youth services, we've closed down youth centres. We don't provide any support throughout uni other than just like meager like loans, and I don't even know what universities are for anymore. And then we just, what do we do? What do we suggest? Has actually Choko Mona like served? Has he been in the army?
Not as far as I know.
Well, this is the issue, isn't it? A majority of the people that want to bring back national service and suggest that like young people should like just be sent in the army, they haven't done it themselves. How could they? Only a minority of the country has served in the army, and yet a majority wants to send young people into the army. If that's not an admission of failure towards our young people, like what is? This like quote from Mr. Umuna is shameful.
He did used to be a DJ. That's quite hard work.
He was a DJ now. Long hours, on your feet.
Late at night.
Yes. Often in a hostile environment. Yeah.
Just to finish my argument, actually any civic form of national service which would bring young people together, which would put them in a situation where they could feel connected to their communities, to other people in the country. Even better, give young people the opportunity to travel up and down this country. Give them the opportunity.
Can we ask something? We've got, if you go, Danny, would you just go, we've just got one more. In these sort of deck of notes, there's a slide. If you just go, there one more, this one. I love this. I don't actually know what it means, but it's extremely profound. Amy, what does it mean?
I believe it's showing that numbers in countries of numbers of people that have gone to university and done tertiary education in green on the left, and those countries with lower rates of people attending university on the right. Because we were looking into whether if someone does national service, are they more likely to then go on to university, because obviously they'll be going later on and they might just want to start working. If you look on the left, you can see Israel's there, Denmark, the Netherlands, Sweden, Korea. They've all got national service policies. Whereas on the right, you've got quite a few countries that don't have it, and they have lower rates of people attending university. France is in the lower half. They've obviously talked about introducing this social service scheme for 16-year-olds. So whether that will rise as a result of that, I guess we'll have to see.
So the point is that there's not a clear or simple correlation between national service and higher attainment at universities.
I wanted to find one, but there's not.
But there's not. That's annoying. But the balance is. But Greece, to an extent, then, Yanis, is an outlier, isn't it? Is that it's got lower university education attainment, but it's by comparison with other countries that do have.
Yes, but Greece has an extensive technical university education attendance, which is not included in the. And I imagine that is the same for other countries, because I know that's the case for Germany, for sure.
Oh, I see. So Germany underrepresented because of technical education.
They focus a lot on technical education because they produce a lot of engineers that go on to work in their car industry, etc., etc. Whereas the left-hand column does tend to produce more people in the cultural industries, does tend to produce more people who work in technology, as in the high end of technology, rather than engineering. So.
Okay, well that's brilliant. So the picture is complicated and misleading. Yeah, the ideal. Accurate, complicated and misleading, these things often are. Before I turn to views in the room, because I think like we're getting somewhere about the idea of cohesion, some form of recruitment of people into an idea of public service, but not necessarily a military one. Michael, do you want to just tell people a little bit about NCS? And I should declare, which slightly jeopardises your confidence in my impartiality, I'm a trustee of the National Citizen Service, so or a patron, I think it is. Yes. So tell us a little bit about sort of what it does, Michael, and how you got into it, and what you think you're trying to achieve.
Yeah, of course. So 10 years ago, I had the opportunity to help set up a pilot program, which is sort of doing where we've got to. So some of the thinking of, yeah, we really like the sort of secondary good effects that came out of national service, people coming together, meeting people from different backgrounds, but we're not sure we want a military version of that. We did that thinking and got to, what about having something with a sense of purpose, so people weren't coming together and maybe sitting around not doing anything, but they were actually doing something positive in their community. So they.
And Michael, have you come out of a military background?
I haven't come out of a military background, no. I came out of a management consultancy firm, as I was telling you earlier. Exactly. So no military background at all. But and I wouldn't have. If I had been sort of attempted to be conscripted into, I would probably have done the same as you and tried to escape my my conscription.
They were trying to escape.
Okay, you just. Okay, they kicked you out. So,
Yeah, they would. Hold on, sorry, Michael. We want to stop because sometimes a story walks in the room.
Yeah, exactly.
So what happened?
So basically, this is the when you have 150,000 people in the army, which cost a load of cash every single month, a truckload has to come in to feed them and provide shelter. They just look for any excuse to kick you out. So when I went in, when I had to present myself to go to the Greek army after 10 years abroad, I went there and they said, like, basically I had two options. I could enlist as a cadet, or, well, when I said no, basically because it was longer, it would last 6 or 7 months longer, I don't quite remember now. When I said no to that, they just went like, well, now we had a look at your medical record, actually, we don't want you. So, you wanted to
give you a longer service.
of becoming an officer,
Yes.
but now you don't want
But to be fair, this underlines Murdo's point, doesn't it? Which is you either want to have professional, trained personnel or none at all.
Yes.
Okay.
It's precisely that is the point I've been making about like generally just bringing people into the army simply for the sake of bringing them there. It's bad for the armed forces, it's bad for them, and in the end, I have to tell you this as well. Each person in Greece supposedly each person spends 9 months in the army. We have the exact same problems that you're talking about here.
In terms of social cohesion.
That I've seen in my years in the UK, we have precisely the same problems. It doesn't work. If you're not bonding over something meaningful, and rather you are confined in a space just for the sake of being there, you do not form any meaningful bonds. As soon as you're out, you're just waiting to get out, and as soon as you're out, it's done.
Right. Michael, sorry, go on and tell us, yeah. Thank you.
People here probably know we've got a massively segregated education system. The OECD actually did some research a few years ago and found that we had the 4th most segregated education system in the world by ethnicity, by class, by different things. So people basically don't have the opportunity to meet people who come from different backgrounds at school. That can perpetuate some of our big social divisions. So what we tried to do in the first year, in 2009, with our pilot program, was bring a group of young people who lived in rough geographic proximity. So we were working in South London, but we had people from, say, Elephant and Castle and the estates around there, together with people from Dulwich down the road, living very close together, but with totally different backgrounds, might have walked past each other in the street, but wouldn't have spent any meaningful time together. Those young people went to, I think the first year it was Wales, so they went to rural Wales. Some of them said, do I need to bring a passport to go to Wales? Because they'd never been out of London before. And they had the opportunity to do all that sort of stuff, climbing mountains, as you were saying, but not in a military setting, but to bond as a team. Second week at a university, so living independently, learning some life skills, public speaking, cooking meals, all that kind of thing. And then the third and fourth week was about that social purpose. So as a group, they got to work on something that they cared about, so something they saw in their local area that they wanted to make a difference to, and they designed and delivered a project to do something positive about that. So that was the first year. I was supposed to go back to my management consultancy job and all that entailed, and was completely hooked because I'd seen the change in that group of young people in not only their sense of themselves, but also their interaction with people who were completely different to them. And actually, if you're 16, you've got much more in common with people from different backgrounds than you might think at the beginning. So by that, I've been with this for 10 years now. We've had 500,000 young people go through this program, 100,000 last year, so that's 1 in 6 of the age group. I think it's very interesting that probably lots of people in the room don't know much about us. You were saying that when we were first talking about it, and I think that's partly because unless you're 16 or the parent of a 16-year-old, I think, to your point at the beginning, James, the media is never really interested in something that's broadly a good news story that's going on, and it never really gets that broader discussion. So we found lots of very positive impacts over the period, that some of which have been talked about. We had Oxford and Manchester University, a researcher from there, come in and do his PhD on studying the impact on social cohesion, and found that there were really profound effects on young people, particularly from isolated communities, feeling different about people from different backgrounds. We're also talking about university, and interestingly, there's a relationship between social integration and social mobility getting on in life, because we know 40% of jobs, some surveys say, are filled through word of mouth. We also know that university is sometimes something that in your family you sort of think, well, I'm always going to go to university, or I'm never going to go to university. And through NCS we found that the bottom fifth in terms of socio-economic groups who've done our programme are 50% more likely to get a place at university after doing the programme. And that's because we think not only do they get to stay at university and demystify it, but they've also been spending a meaningful amount of time for people who have very different life stories, and they kind of say, actually, I could do that too.
So Mark, can you talk us through, and you're now the Chief Exec of the National Citizen Service. Yeah. So can you just talk us also through a little bit, just the nuts and bolts? So how much does it cost? Who gets to go? Where do you find people come from, and where do they not come from?
Yeah, so in terms of where they come from, we go into almost every school in the country. Now, one of the things we might come on and talk about a little bit later is that this program at the moment is completely voluntary. So young people have to say they want to do it. We have to go in, convince the head of a school to let us in to have an assembly in the school. We're publicly funded, so obviously we want to get a really mixed group of young people. So the cost of the program is to actually go through the program around £1,300–1,400 per person. So obviously that would be a massive barrier to most parents for their young people. So the state has kind of stepped in to pay that. So the cost is either nothing if you can't afford it, or £50, and we charge that because we do have an issue that people, particularly at 16, kind of sign up and then decide a few months later that they actually don't want to do it. So we want a little commitment device.
And it's 3 weeks. It's still the 3-week model?
It's 4 weeks. The introduction is 4 weeks. So 2 weeks residential, 1 week outward bound, 1 week at a university, and then 2 weeks of doing your project back in your local area. And then we have quite an active alumni community. So to make this thing run, we have 10,000 seasonal people working on the program, which is obviously a big group. Now 1 in 3 of the people who actually run the program have been through it. So there's quite a big and growing alumni community.
And what's the budget? What's the cost of it overall?
The overall budget is around £180 million a year for somewhere between 100,000 upwards people. So it's a significant national investment in the next generation. We have a lot of evaluation which actually shows things like the university admission, things like lower anxiety 1 year on, continued volunteering, people staying in touch. You actually find that to the extent that you can monetize these things, more money comes back in social benefits than is invested.
Please don't be shy. Weigh in. Thoughts, observations, sir.
Hi, yeah, my name's Pierre. I'm from educational charity City Year UK. We recruit volunteers aged 18 to 25 to spend a year volunteering in disadvantaged schools, supporting pupils with from low socio-economic backgrounds. We're actually pushing for a non-mandatory, non-military national service program, like they have in France and Germany and things. I think we talk a lot about social cohesion. And how a scheme like this might bring about. I think if it was mandatory and military, I think that would be bad for intergenerational social cohesion, because you'd have a set of older adults forcing younger people to do a scheme that they never had to do in their younger life. So I think instead of making it mandatory, I think what we need to do is make the offer so good that there's no need to make it mandatory and conscript people. And the best way to do that is to offer a real, genuine double benefit. So one side of that benefit is for the areas in which they're making real social difference in the areas they're working in schools and hospitals, etc. Because a lot of NCS graduates, they have a great time in the program and they want to spend more time doing social action.
Yeah.
And if we had a year-long program, for example, offered that opportunity, they could graduate from that NCS and then they kind of do an NCS Gold option, where they made a real or even more difference in their communities because they spent a year.
Sorry, Pierre, an NCS Gold option?
Gold.
Gold. Oh, I thought. I was like, send them, you young people, yeah, right.
And James, just to say, that's effectively what President Macron in France is proposing. So it hasn't, the idea is still...
It's non-mandatory, non-military in France. I thought it was going to be a mandatory.
He's proposing a mandatory,
Yeah, so in France they have service civique, which is non-mandatory, non-military, and that's had really, really high rates of application and recruitment. I think it was expanded under Hollande, and they have over 100,000 a year. It's probably the most successful non-mandatory, non-military example in the world. So I think double benefit needs to be both for the beneficiaries that the volunteers work with, but also for themselves. So one part of that is during the programme they get skills to build social cohesion, but a second part of that is that we give something back to them for they've given a year of service. And in America, for example, they get money off tuition fees, they get free accommodation, they might get free travel in the areas that they live. And I think that could, if we made the offer really, really attractive and exciting and fresh, that would mean there would be any need.
So, Pierre, just follow that. What would you do if you were going to incent? So your NCS Gold plan is 1 year long.
Yep.
It's It's at what age?
18 to 25.
And what do you get? And what's the incentive for you as an individual, as well as the skills and the reward of doing something good?
Exactly. So, as I mentioned, in America, for example, you get
Tuition fees.
You get maybe a year of tuition fees. If we replicated something like that in the UK, I think that could be a really exciting proposition. Some of them get free accommodation while they're volunteering. There's many incentives like that. They might get loans while they're doing it, so that there's less financial barricades to it. So that's some of the examples of.
Okay. I'll come on to you in a minute, Mike, because I imagine you're thinking about these things. Yeah, Ellie. Sorry, Ellie's a colleague of mine.
Hi. I just think that the question, or even, the way you framed it, national service, it's so tied with feelings of nationalism, which I think is unattractive to a lot of young people. I think the sense of Britishness that we might have had or felt proud or we revered our country 30 years ago, I don't think that's the same now, especially in the current climate, what's going on in the government. I think when I speak to people that live all over the world, I feel quite ashamed at the moment to be British. I'm not proud of my British identity. And I think there are negative connotations that come with those associations. So I wonder if instead of calling it or making it sort of a national thing, we can have a more humanistic approach to these kind of enterprises.
And that presumably is the Macron model. The service civique is in that mould. Is that the idea? Yeah.
Yeah.
Chris, yeah.
Sorry, I'm a pollster at YouGov, so I work in public opinion, trying to work out what the public think. I was going to try and make a fairly similar point as well, because it's all right.
But just with some data and exactly, yeah, that's right.
What we see in public opinion is national service is a very popular idea amongst older people, and it's not a very popular idea. The term national service, particularly military national service, is a very popular idea amongst older people. It is not a very popular idea amongst young people. It's not a very popular idea amongst the people that you're aiming to get involved in these projects. And sort of, the cynic inside, you think, when it was originally brought in the early noughties by a prime minister trying to get elected, he cared about the votes of the older people, rather than necessarily branding it in a way that was going to try and effectively recruit people to the kind of thing he was trying to do. So I won't pose it as a question, but to give it as a thought, I wonder if there are difficulties around recruiting people because it has been branded in a way that was originally created to help David Cameron win an election, rather than to come up with a good youth scheme, like you were saying. Actually, what we really need is more funding towards youth services, which the National Citizenship Service is, but was done in a way to.
Chris, can we just one thing at a time? Because I think we moved through. We breezed pretty quickly through the idea of moving to a system of national military service. It seemed as though there was little, at least from experienced military people, enthusiasm for that. One of the risks, it seems to me, that is implied by Yanis's experience is that you introduce a non-mandatory, non-military service, but it's actually a little wishy-washy. It's sort of kind of Duke of Edinburgh for everyone, and it's not actually doing anything that's great, but it's got lots of people sitting around on their rucksacks, Yeah. The answer to that would be, okay, you put some steel into it, you could do something mandatory. Are you saying that the data on polling shows that if you try to do anything mandatory, you would have a big generational problem between young and old?
Yes, there is wide support for national service across everyone who you're not asking to do it.
Right.
And if you were to be further cynical, I'd go even further and point out there is massive support for national service, for military national service, let's say, amongst people who wouldn't be asked to do it. And also, you say, well, if there's a war tomorrow, we don't have national service, would you go and fight? They say, hell no. So, they're big in favour, the nostalgia and everything else of making young people go out and join the military, forced to join the military, but would they be willing to do it themselves? Amongst those older age groups, our data indicates that they wouldn't be.
Right, okay, that's interesting. All right, so I'm going to come, there are a bunch of people.
Just a detail.
Yeah.
What I was talking about people sitting around,
yes.
That is mandatory.
No, that's right. No, I appreciate that.
What happens if you put people there and they can't leave?
Fair point, I get that. So I'm going to come to you, and then I'm going to come to you, Romain, and then you, madam. Yes, sir.
So my name is Paddy, I'm a serving officer in a minute in the Army. It's interesting you talk about a generational divide. So what I would say to that is I'd agree with a lot of the points made about the army would struggle to integrate thousands of people a year, but what we're talking about a lot of the minute within the military is trying to reconnect with the actual society itself. So the consequence of becoming smaller, more professional, doing lots of different things all the time is that you don't interact much with the public. Now, I would suspect that the older generation, because they have a better understanding of what the military actually entails. So you ask someone who did national service, they would know what one end of the rifle looks like from the other. They would know roughly how a tank works. They would know roughly all these sorts of things. So but the current generation, because they've never done national service or anything sort of vaguely like that, less and less people have served, so they've got less and less idea of what actually goes on within the military. That empathy, so everyone has sympathy for the armed forces, but they don't have empathy, they don't understand exactly what's involved. And that's what I think drives the generational divide, is because you have a group of people who they sympathise, they don't want to see soldiers blown up, killed, whatever, but they don't understand the motivations behind or the benefits that military service can bring. So all the things you talked about, sort of coming together as a community. So for instance, in my cohort, we've got people, I'm from the top of Scotland, we've got people from southwest of England, Ireland, Wales, all that sort of thing. People who've never normally meet in real life. So I think that would be one advantage of national service, would just be, from a military perspective, would just be to expand the knowledge of civic sort of things.
And can I just one thought, whether it was mandatory or not, put the mandatory, non-mandatory question aside, what do you think, Paddy, about a mixed model? Right? Let's say that you took Pierre's idea and you said, okay, we're going to have a year that serves. You can go and serve and serve in the NHS or local community, but actually you could also be absorbed by the armed forces and you could do your year there. Do you think that you, as a professional member of the armed forces, would actually find you know, to use Murdo's, I don't know if you hear Murdo's phrase. Murdo's phrase was a self-licking lollipop. You would just spend your time trying to cater for the people who were in the organisation.
Yeah, I agree, actually. Having a model where you could pick your own path would be actually very good, because you don't want unmotivated people. That's the worst thing in a team, is unmotivated people. And that's what we spend the majority of our time trying to do, is everyone pulling in the right direction. If you look at the Swedish example, I think, which you've got a couple of notes on, is that they basically asked people would they want to serve within the military if they did national service, and kind of took people out of that. They selected people to try and build up numbers, because you're right, like, you spend 2 years training as an officer almost in the army, and even that's before you even get let loose on actual soldiers. So trying to train people within a year and make a useful contribution is pretty difficult. But we do things just now that you can do a look at life, where basically you do a year in between university, so people are put to use that way, and they're volunteering for it. So I think a selected model would actually be very good.
And can I just want to touch on one thing you said, which I really was sort of interested by. So, you know, that people who'd served in the armed forces knew one end of a rifle from the other, they knew how a tank works. Yes. Amongst your friends who are non-military, you've got friends who are non-military? Okay, great. Yeah. All right. So do you think that you have better technical understanding, organisational understanding of things than they do? As in, one of the questions you have of people who serve in the armed forces is that they've got a sort of understanding of engineering. They can, you know, pull engines apart and see how it works. Is that the case, or is that just a myth?
Well, I'm a royal engineer myself. That doesn't mean anything about engineering.
Well, that's reassuring.
The way he got there was he was on the same course as me at uni and he didn't finish it. So.
It's turning out to be hugely enlightening in ways we didn't expect. But do you, I guess the reason why it's a serious point is that there is a concern that we don't have enough people in STEM, we don't have enough people who are thinking about those kinds of things. Do you think a sort of exposure to the military would change that, or not really?
It's more the fact that what we're struggling for people in STEM as well. It's not so much that serving in the military gives you a better idea of technical knowledge. It's more the idea, I'm trying to sort of phrase it properly, it's more the idea that you learn how to work with other people.
Right, okay. So it's organisational more than it is technical or engineering.
And people don't understand, like my friends will ask me, oh, so what do you actually do? Like, how many people have you killed to date? That sort of thing. People don't understand because they're serving. The army's more about the teeth arms, like the sort of fighting parts. There's, for my corps is out building refugee camps in South Sudan. It's out improving things in Belize. It's out doing all these other things people don't quite understand goes on. The logistic corps goes out and helps people after hurricanes in the Caribbean. You've got MedCorps deploying all over the world to do little things, anti-poaching stuff going on in Mali. These are all military things. They're not things that people understand the military do because they either haven't served or they don't know anyone that does serve. So I think it just gives you, it does give you structure.
Yeah.
There's no denying that. But does it make you any better than a civilian? I'd argue not.
Yeah. Let me ask you, Rama, maybe. Can you tell us a bit about Step to Serve? Because that seems to be more, obviously not the mandatory end, but the voluntary end.
Yeah.
Tell us a little bit about it and about how you got involved in it.
Yeah, so for context, I am Ramar Affleck, and I'm an ambassador for the I Will campaign and have been since the launch in 2013. Step Up to Serve, or the I Will campaign, was founded essentially just with the aim of getting more young people involved in social action by 2020, which is fast approaching. And as part of that campaign, essentially, I'll define what social action is. It's essentially positive action in the service of others. And so I and quite a number of other young people were nominated at the time for social action we were doing at the time, and that continues to happen every year. And I think one of the things that's quite interesting about this conversation is I think actually it's based entirely on a misconception that there aren't young people out there doing practical things in the service of others.
There aren't?
That there are. There are young people out there that are doing things in the service of others, whether that is NCS or whether that's the Duke of Edinburgh Awards or the members of youth parliaments that are out there doing things, campaigning. And so I think sometimes it is this kind of misconception that actually young people aren't doing anything. And there are a lot of young people actually doing positive things. And I think there's an interesting conversation about, earlier you were talking about the media coverage and coverage of some of the things that, those positive things that young people are doing. But pretty much all of the evidence suggests that the real way to make an impact on young people is to give them a journey of experiences. So not a one-off opportunity where they're forced or obligated to do something, but actually where they're given a meaningful opportunity to contribute, where they get something out of it too. And quite often that's a habit that they'll want to take on throughout life. And I can only use myself as an example of that. The first time I ever volunteered or did something was at the age of 11. And I'm 24 now, and I still want to and still continue to volunteer. And I think, I see that amongst the peers that I've grown up with as well. The people who were volunteering back then, they're still volunteering now. And
can I ask you just, so I mean, amazing you've got that kind of body of experience, right? 13 years. There's a difficult thing with volunteering, which is like, who's against it, right? You're not going to have an argument with people, expressing that goodwill and doing something about it. I think the worry, if you like, industrialised volunteering, if you took it to a much bigger scale, is would you be kind of pretending to create jobs for people? Would you be pretending to create things? In your experience of volunteering, when you look at what's actually worked, where you thought, I've expended a lot of time and energy and this has had a genuine impact, and when you've looked around at things that you've done and you thought, we were slightly spinning our wheels here, when does it work and when does it not? How would you organise something at scale to make sure it had a real impact?
Yeah, I think that's where the government's role comes into play, and I think it's a careful balancing act. Of course, we don't want young people taken advantage of. We don't want young people to take part in essentially, propping up a workplace because actually, they're giving back to the community. It really should be about young people having the opportunity to learn and develop in some way. And I think, you have to draw the line at the opportunity where employers are given that opportunity to exploit young people. In terms of where it hasn't worked and where it has, I think actually it's just about, there have been times where I think those opportunities those opportunities have been tokenistic, and actually the experience and the opportunity to contribute hasn't actually been as meaningful as as was suggested, and I think that has to be a part of the conversation. But for me, I think the main thing that I've taken away from this question, whenever it's discussed, is actually it's based on this idea that young people are just out stabbing each other.
Right.
Yes, there are young people who are, are finding themselves in difficult places, but actually, for the most part, a lot of young people are contributing something.
Okay. So there's a lady next to you. Yes, madam.
Hearing about all the...
Will you just introduce yourself?
Sorry, Katrina Oliphant, I'm a radio producer. Hearing all the different things that are going on, a lot of which I wasn't aware of, it seems to me, and the idea that one could have a plan where one chose what one wanted to do, that there would be some merit in having, if you like, a group of organisations under an umbrella, so that if people had a year and then they could choose where they spent it, subject to being accepted. And certainly what Paddy was saying about the army, my father was in the Gurkhas, and the Gurkhas spent a lot of time after the earthquake. They were in Nepal, and it seems to me that there will be excellent opportunities for people, because what you need is people to do often quite physical work, so they can be part of something worthwhile. But I really wanted to talk about Norway. I was in the high north of Norway covering a story for World Service a few years ago on Norwegian defence. And so we spoke to a lot of people on the border who were doing, as part of their service, they were being border guards. And picking up these points about it being a real opportunity, what they were saying, they were clearly enjoying it, they felt it had a purpose, they were invested with responsibility, so their role was appreciated, and it wasn't a question of they were just whiling away a year, and nor was it militaristic. A very interesting thing about that whole border relationship.
It's a year-long.
I think it's a year in Norway, I think, and there were men and women, and I don't know how much choice they get, but what was very striking was that they felt they were doing something worthwhile, and they were engaging in helping their country. And I take on board the problems at the moment with Britain as a country, but they felt that they were engaging with something important and the wider society, and exactly as other people have said of people coming from different parts. They come from all over Norway.
Okay, that's interesting. I'm going to come to you, man, at the back, and then you, sir, and I'm going to come to you, Mark, if I may, because I want to ask you a question. Yeah.
So my name is Zain. I'm an economist at the Portland Trust, which is a...
So what did you say, the name?
My name is Zain.
Zain.
I'm an economist at an organization called the Portland Trust. We work primarily in Israel and Palestine. I'm Palestinian, and I've grown up in a situation where our cousins across the never-defined border are constricted to precisely to remove the barriers between internal barriers within their nation, but also participate systematically in racial segregation, essentially. So you have a situation whereby all of the arguments I'm hearing here are around people who admire the army for its role in creating team effort and social cohesion. These things are an externality to the army. They are not.
Right.
They're not the essential element of the military, and therefore that's kind of, the speaker from NCS mentioned that this is the most segregated society. Our education is the most segregated education. I think probably there are better ways to fix the education and spend more in education to eradicate these issues, rather than go a roundabout way. And we have a saying in Arabic, it's like, where's your ear? It's right there. This is the most roundabout way to get to the point of removing differences between people.
Right.
If it's about removing differences, I don't see why we need to do it through militarization. That seems to be...
So can I ask you, so you would say no to military service, full stop, no to mandatory national service, but even if you had Michael's £180 million budget, you would put that into school opportunities rather than into...
Absolutely. I think there's plenty of evidence and data to show that economies whereby there's more spending in education and health have less inequality, and as a result of that, have a better social contract, closer relationship to each other, they like each other more because they feel like they're all kind of getting something out of society.
Okay.
Once you have high inequality in society, that's really the biggest threat in cohesion. We can spend all the money we want to get people to play soccer with each other, but it will be the most roundabout way to solve the actual problem.
Right. There's a lady sitting next to you, just wanted to say something.
Yeah, that was pretty much my point, that, you know, going back to...
And sorry, what's your name?
Breckner. I
Breckner,
work in publishing.
Yeah.
So just going back to this point that, you know, national service can break down these notions of class and create a sense of purpose and social cohesion. It's like there are conditions that prevent that sense of social cohesion. And we're talking about class here like it's just some kind of notion. But when you force people to come together and expose everyone to different aspirations, that doesn't get rid of the material barriers that they have to fulfilling those aspirations. So why aren't we addressing those material barriers? Why aren't we...
But what do you say, Breckner, to sort of Michael's point, which was actually just the exposure to university increases your likelihood to stay in university, and that itself is a step towards greater social mobility?
I mean, again, it's like that point of like, where's your ear, like going this way, like you can improve your access to, like, I don't know, like make university accessible to everyone rather than certain social classes in society. You can have like an education system that sort of really encourages kids to go to university from the outset. It doesn't, I don't think that just exposure kind of creates the sense, and even if it does, there are still material barriers there that prevent people from like accessing education.
Okay, I just want to put Mark Oliver on the spot, if I may. So if you were, so many of you won't know, but Mark is someone. If you were running a large institution and you wanted to make a new policy, you'd probably get Mark Oliver in at an exorbitant fee to give you decent consulting on how that policy might work. And Mark, so I just wanted, forgive me, if I wanted to get some idea. If let's say that you took a combination of Michael and Pierre's idea, and you ramped it up and you said, look, we want to move a couple of 100,000 people through this scheme. So you would have a big budgetary requirement for it, but also there would be some economic displacement because there would be some things that are currently done by businesses or parts of the public sector. How would you, if you were thinking about how you would structure that as a policy that wouldn't be disruptive and would be affordable, what would you think about?
Yeah, well, I've written down what should they be doing, because the military thing seems to be not very popular, especially if it's not even military, it's just sitting around in barracks.
Right.
There's a kind of community service, but how far is that a substitute for just cheap labour for the care services? So what is it that they could do which would be truly additive and also of value to them, because it's going to have both of them. I'm also concerned about the mandatory versus non-mandatory. You don't want to be mandatory, that's going to have lots of ramifications. But non-mandatory, there are plenty of voluntary things you can do now, and have them mandatory. They tend to be a bit self-selecting. Isn't the truth about this, we want people to do this kind of thing who won't be volunteering to do it. We don't want to force them, so how do we incentivise? It's important people don't go for a Duke of Edinburgh award or join the Venture Scouts or do all these things. They're the people who want to get involved, aren't they? How do you do that in a non-mandatory way? That's a bit problematic.
And can I just go back to the additive point? Right? So let's say that you do bring in tens of thousands of people who can assist in forms of social care or the NHS. That would seem instinctively like a good thing. Is it?
The minimum wage.
You would have to pay them a minimum wage.
Otherwise we have a two-part level model. You'd have a minimum wage up here and everybody else put in free labor down there. You'd have to be very careful about how you introduce it, because...
And just explain, because if you were running the NHS, you would be getting a portion of discounted or even free labour.
Well, I think people do things voluntarily anyway. You know, charity shops have free labour. No shop assistant complains that charity shops have free labour, do they? In fact, they do. But it's at the margins it's acceptable. If you do it at scale, there will be an issue. Suddenly you've got 100,000 people going and becoming voluntary care workers. There'll be an issue about what it means for people who do it as a job. Right. It may not be a bad thing, but you have to work out how you actually involve it side by side.
Thank you. Madam.
I'm Rebecca, I'm an events manager, and I was a special constable for 5 years.
Right.
So I sort of think about what you were saying about being the sort of cheap labour element of sort of adding numbers to the police force for free, and I mean, I really enjoyed it, but you've still got that element. I mean, you can't tell the difference between a special constable and a normal police officer. They wear exactly the same uniform, have exactly the same powers, but you are essentially with a full-time police officer and a special constable who has maybe 12 weeks training a couple of times a week, and then you're working with a full-time officer who's then having to also look after you as a special constable because you haven't got as much experience or as much training as they have.
And what's your and a special constable? Forgive me. What's the terms of service?
I think it's changed since I left, but it used to be 25 hours a week, so on top of your full-time job.
And it's purely voluntary.
Purely voluntary.
And is there a limit? Is there a ceiling on how many years you can serve?
I think you just retire when a normal police officer retires, I guess.
Right.
But it's quite good in that you have. Here we're talking about just lots of young people doing stuff together as young people.
Yeah.
But when I was doing special constabling, there was people who were 18, 19, and people who were in their 40s, all training together and all doing things together, which I think brings people who perhaps don't have more sort of older generations in their life, someone to talk to about things going on in their lives.
Okay. Kate, Kate, then I'll come back to you, Rowan, and then you, Michael, and then we're going to have to wind up. Yes.
Sorry, very quickly, I'm Kate from Tortoise. So for anyone that works with me, you'll probably not believe this, but I basically had to do a year in CCF in the Navy, which I'm coming off the speed. What was quite interesting was the fact that, so I was very privileged in the fact that I went to a private school, so obviously there was the funding for the CCF there. We had the choice of the Army, the Navy and the Air Force at the time. What we did was there was a massive sense of kind of togetherness with it. Obviously there was a massive amount of discipline with it, but obviously there was the funding behind it to be able to provide that service within the school, as it were. So obviously there was a certain amount, as I say, a certain amount of discipline that came with it. And then after that, if we didn't, like me, didn't want to continue within the forces we went off and did what we called at the time, please excuse this, but granny bashing, which was basically when...
What?
Granny bashing.
Yes.
I'm smoking shut.
Just want to make sure the mics had caught it. Yeah, exactly.
But we went out into the community afterwards, and it was basically every Wednesday afternoon. If we weren't doing core, then we were doing community service, as it were. And it was a massive help within the community. And I think we talk about the issues with knife crime and everything else, and I know obviously that I was incredibly lucky by the fact that I went to a private school, and as I said, there was the funding. But actually, if there was the opportunity to have something like that when you're 16, to bring something into school, when you're probably at that point where there's that tipping point as to what you're going to do moving forwards. I know that there was a lot of friends of mine that went into the army off the back of that training, as it were. So I think it's just something that's quite interesting. It didn't do me any harm, let's put it that way.
Interesting. You right on it.
Yeah, so I just wanted to come back on 2 points. One, you mentioned being a special constable. I'm currently a serving special constable, and I think actually the point I made earlier about balance is really important. And actually, I think when it becomes unbalanced is when you become reliant on that free labour. So, for example, I can see that evolving within the Met Police. I probably shouldn't say that. I'm not speaking on behalf of them, by the way, but I can see that the Met Police, as an example of that, even as an organisation which hasn't cut its workforce nearly as much as some of the other 43 police forces, have become more reliant on special constables as a way of delivering both community policing and all the rest of it. But to come back on your point, I think it's also about delivering a public good. So I wouldn't say it's beneficial for someone to volunteer with a bank, for example. But even the NHS, even though we say it wouldn't work on a mass scale, even the NHS has volunteers working with it in it. People just don't actually know. And so I think some of this is also a misconception of what's actually happening. How many people know that there are police officers walking down the street probably right now who are unpaid, who are just doing it because they want to give back to society?
Yeah, and you don't know.
And I think that has to be part of this conversation.
Yeah, thank you. Michael.
Yeah, great. I'd like to pick up on a couple of points. So Zane, I think Zane's not wrong, and I can't remember the expression, not knowing my ass from my elbow. But the situation is we've got two competing objectives, right? We've got a desire for people to have choice, parents to have choice of what school they send their child to, and we've got people who choose to live in quite different communities. And so if people just go to their local school, you're quite likely to still end up with degrees of segregation in this country, because people don't live typically, maybe in London we do to some extent, but people tend to live in neighbourhoods that are not as diverse as the country itself, A, and then B, people choose to send their children to schools with a religious background or an independent school or whatever. So you could say we're going to sort of end all that and force, bus pupils across the country. But I think practically that's not going to happen right now or for a long time. So therefore, saying what can we do, the practical suggestion that we've got is you bring people from across the education system together. But you're not wrong, there's a different way of doing it, which would be to force people to go to a school that might not be if they're choosing, but we're not choosing to do that. I think just the other thing to say on the social class point, again, it's not wrong that we have a system where we have divisions between people of social class. Why don't we deal with that problem, not bring people together? Again, I think that's probably another thinking about how we do that. But one of the things that I think you can see correlated across countries where there's more social trust, more integration, people spend more time together, you actually have the conditions for social democracy, you have conditions for more redistribution and those sort of policies. So I think these things are linked. I think if you bring people together to share experiences, to get to know each other, they're more likely over time to favour those sort of policies that will lead to a fairer society. If you have people very segregated, they're less likely to do this. So I would argue that things like NCS, things that can bring people together when they're children, can actually lead to the sort of society that you guys want.
I'm going to have, as you will see, Agatha has stormed past the line. She's swift. Rob, I don't know whether there's anything left of your voice, but having listened to what you've heard, and having actually served back in '57, where do you come out of interest on this? What would you do now?
Out with the opinion that's being expressed. I think national service is a terrible phrase. Any form of community service, social service, whatever, has to be rebranded. National service is completely the wrong image. I think mandatory is difficult. I like the idea of making it so attractive that peer pressure says, why aren't you doing it? Because we've done it and look what we've got out of it. You won't get everybody, but you get sufficient. So I think that's really good. And I think that there is room for all. I think it's a bit of everything, whether it's the CCF or whether it's serving actually in the military, doing a role perhaps not military, but as hands-on, working in a disaster area under supervision, through to all the other initiatives. So I think the solution's here. I just admire the person who's going to bring it all together and make it a policy.
Well, I don't know who we're going to get to. Well, Amy, will you? We might ask you to do that as well, having done the notes. Well, listen, thank you very much. I really appreciate your time. A think-in, while having the cameras on and being recorded, is intended to be quite an informal event, like a newspaper leader conference. And at the end, the editor, in this case me, would try and say, okay, well, here's our line. Strangely, a lot of these things, I pretend there's a line, but there's not, right? And on this one, actually, more than most, I think it's actually quite clear. So I think we said, all right, what would we think about the return of military service? And while, we started with Rob's point about the cohesion and the sense of being able to rub along together that comes from, I think, your phrase, Rob, being in a tin can together, sardine can together, there's a great deal to be said for that. I thought, Zane, your point, which is that's not the principal interest of the armed forces, that might be a nice byproduct, but not its intention, is really key. And Murdo, obviously, your point very bluntly put that the idea of return to military service would be very, very bad news for the army and something that would distract from the work it needs to do, I think sort of paid very quickly to the military question. I guess what was surprising to me were two things. One is I had expected to come into this conversation and be much more tempted by mandatory. That I thought the risk was, to Mark's point, that if you're trying to get people into a form of national service, where they get, Michael, your skills, your social impact, your outdoor experience. If you're trying to get those people who don't naturally volunteer, you should go for something that is that's mandatory. I thought, Yanis, your point, well made, which was actually it's the mandatory programs that leave people feeling as though they're sort of sitting around and causes often that bad and low levels of morale. So the interesting thing was obviously the point, Pierre, that you were making, which is how do you have a non-mandatory service? The non-mandatory bit, I think, is about incentives, right? And those incentives would have to be so sufficient that the people that Mark points out that are not necessarily interested in joining up would join up. The other thing that surprised me was thinking, I imagined that we would come out for something that was mandatory and something that was non-military. Actually, I come away thinking we want something non-mandatory that's rigged with a great incentive scheme, but probably is a mixed model. I mean, listening to you, Paddy, I was thinking, well, why would you have something that was expressing explicitly non-military? Why would you not have some element of it that was open? But I thought, Katrina, your point, which was you have to have some scheme where you actually actively go out and you listen and you learn from organisations that work elsewhere. Norway would be a good example. I did think that, Bretton, I do think that anything that we would say would have to take into account that it's not fixing necessarily the education system. It's not pretending away, economic disparities, and nor is it immediately going to fix them. I don't think you can pretend attributes to it. But I suppose the only other thing to point out is that it's easy to come up with these kinds of policies. Chukwuramuna's statement sounded pretty rosy. I thought that the point about displacement, and how do you, if you're in the police service and you think, oh, we're going to get, some special constables are good, but if that is a route to cutting the numbers of, fully trained police officers, I think Rebecca, people worry about that, and Rummel, you'll know that too. But I thought I came away thinking, imagine we said, okay, we don't want military, we do want something non-mandatory with a good incentive scheme, mixed military and non-military, but one that was built upon what currently existed, to your point, using the umbrella of existing services, and built upon that, so it was building on Step Up to Serve or the NCS. The one thing I think you would want to say is you'd want to go from the 100,000 odd to several 100,000. So the question would be, how do you build that with that scale of ambition? Because it does seem to me as though something needs to be done that gets back to a sense of learning and shared experience. So I think that's what you'll get from us. At Tortoise, what we do at the end of a ThinkIn like this is leave and go and have dinner and have a nice evening. But tomorrow morning we'll pull together a readout of what you've heard. We'll share it with people in the room. If you've got thoughts on how we could explore it, and specifically programs that you have worked on, thoughts that you've got, Chris, for example, if you've got data that you think might help us flesh this out so it's really as well informed as it can be, we'd appreciate all your input. Thank you for your time on behalf of Katie and me and all of us at Tortoise. Have a very good evening. Thanks very much.